You're not on the deed, you never were. So pack your things and get out of my mother's house by Friday. My brother-in-law said it the way you'd tell someone their parking meter expired. Flat. Inconvenienced. Like I was the problem. I was still wearing the black cardigan I'd borrowed from my mom's closet 6 months ago because she loved the way it looked on me and kept saying, "Keep it, honey, it suits you better anyway." I hadn't washed it since she passed. I know that sounds strange. Grief does strange things. My name is Valerie, and 3 weeks ago, I watched my mother take her last breath in a hospice bed in Tucson, Arizona, holding my hand. My sister was 40 minutes late. She got stuck in traffic, she said. She cried the loudest at the funeral, though. I remember noticing that. And now, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, the one with the chipped yellow tile my mom always meant to replace, and never did, my brother-in-law was telling me I had until Friday. I looked at my sister. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, eyes somewhere near the window. She didn't say a word, so I picked up my bag and I left, because I didn't know yet what I know now. The drive to my friend's apartment took 45 minutes, and I spent most of it not crying, which surprised me. I think I was past the kind of grief that produces tears. What I felt was quieter and more dangerous than sadness. It was the specific discomfort of something that doesn't add up. My mother was not a careless woman. She was an elementary school librarian for 26 years. She kept her tax documents in color-coded folders. She had a binder for her medical information, a binder for her insurance, and a laminated sheet taped inside her kitchen cabinet with emergency contacts in alphabetical order. She was not the kind of person who left things unsettled. Which is why, as I sat in the passenger seat of my own car, too tired to drive myself, while my friend Cecily talked softly about nothing in particular to keep me calm, I kept thinking about one thing my mom had said to me last October. We were sitting on her porch, watching the neighbors' kids ride bikes in circles. She was having a good day, which had become the metric we used. Good days and bad days. She reached over and patted my knee. "Val," she said, "when things feel upside down, go find Patricia." I had assumed she meant a neighbor, or maybe someone from her church group. I hadn't thought about it again until that moment in the car when I realized I had no idea who Patricia was, but I was going to find out. I stayed on Cecily's couch for 4 nights. She didn't ask questions, which was either very kind or very worried, and with Cecily it was usually both. On the 5th morning, I went through the bag I'd grabbed from the house. I hadn't even packed it on purpose. I'd reached for it automatically, muscle memory, the same way you grab your keys even when you're not sure where you're going. Insides was a mix of things. A phone charger, a receipt from a pharmacy, an old birthday card from my mom that I must have been keeping in my nightstand. And at the bottom, a manila envelope I didn't recognize. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. Just Valerie. No address, no postage, she had put it there herself. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a letter, not instructions. Just a name, a phone number, and an address in downtown Tucson. Patricia Hale, estate attorney. And below it, in her careful librarian print, "She already knows. Just show up." The office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. The receptionist looked up when I walked in and said, before I could open my mouth, "You must be Valerie. We've been expecting your call." Or visit, I suppose. That should have felt reassuring. Instead, it made my stomach drop in the specific way it does when you realize everyone else has been reading a chapter you somehow skipped. Patricia Hale was a small woman in her late 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of calm that comes from decades of watching families fall apart across a conference table. She shook my hand, gestured to a chair, and said, "I'm sorry about your mother." She was very thorough. "What does that mean?" I asked. She folded her hands. "It means she anticipated exactly what would happen, and she planned accordingly. The will was real, signed, notarized, filed with the county probate court 8 months before my mother died, during a stretch of good days when she was still clear and deliberate and entirely herself. Patricia had drawn it up herself. The house, her savings account, her small investment portfolio, all of it had been left to a revocable living trust. I was the beneficiary, not my sister, not jointly, me. "Then why," I said slowly, "does my sister think she inherited everything?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding how much to say, but the silence of someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for the right moment. "Because your mother wanted to know something," she said finally. She wanted to know what your sister would do if she believed she had inherited everything. I stared at her. It was a condition of the trust, she continued. Your mother placed the estate in temporary administrative hold for 30 days following her death. During that time, your sister was informed, by a letter your mother had prepared, that she was the sole heir. The letter was intentionally incomplete. It referenced a will but did not specify the details. So she lied to her. Your mother presented an incomplete picture, Patricia said carefully. She wanted to see what your sister would do with the assumption of power, whether she would reach out to you, whether she would offer to split things fairly, whether she would behave like someone who deserved to be trusted. The room was very still. She didn't, I said. It wasn't a question. Your brother-in-law called me the day after the funeral to ask about expediting the property transfer, Patricia said. Your sister changed the Netflix password on the shared family account the same afternoon you left. She paused. I'm not supposed to find that one as damning as I do. But your mother would have. Something unlocked in my chest, not relief exactly. More like recognition. What happens now? I asked. The 30-day window closes in 9 days, she said. At that point, the trust becomes fully active and the estate transfers to you. Your sister has no legal claim. She never did. And the house? The house is yours. She slid a document across the desk. But we'll need to begin the formal notification process. That's where it gets slightly complicated. Slightly complicated turned out to be a generous description. My sister called me on day 6. I almost didn't pick up. I was sitting in Cecily's parking lot eating a gas station sandwich and trying to remember the last time I'd had a meal I'd actually cooked myself. Since before the hospice visits, probably. Since before the good days became the only thing we measured time by. I picked up on the 4th ring, Val. Her voice was different. Not the flat boardroom voice from the kitchen, something softer underneath it that I recognized from when we were kids. She used to use that voice when she'd broken something and was trying to figure out how bad the damage was before she told anyone. Can we talk? We're talking right now, I said. I mean in person. Can you come over? I almost said no. I had every reason to say no. But there was something about her voice, not the softness, but the specific frequency underneath it. The one that sounds like a person who has just understood something they really didn't want to understand. That made me say yes. Not because I forgave her. I hadn't, and I wasn't going to pretend. But because I needed to see her face when she learned what was coming. She opened the door before I knocked. She must have been watching from the window. The house looked different already. She'd moved some of my mother's things. The ceramic owl that had sat on the entryway table for 30 years was gone. There were new throw pillows on the couch. Small things, but they registered like small cuts. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't say of course or sure. I just walked in and sat down. She sat across from me, hands in her lap. Her husband was nowhere I could see. Smart of him. I think I made a mistake, she said. I know, I said. She looked up. What? I know you made a mistake. I kept my voice even. I also know why you're saying it now and not 6 days ago. She shook her head slowly. I don't know what you mean. You heard from Patricia, I said, or you tried to and she wouldn't return your calls, or your husband's calls. Or you found something in Mom's paperwork that didn't match what you thought you knew. The color in her face shifted in a way that told me I was right, but she wasn't ready to say which part. Mom didn't leave it all to me, she said. Quiet, like she was still deciding whether saying it out loud made it more real. No, I said, she didn't. She left it to you. She left it to me. She looked down at her hands. I watched her process it. Not the loss of the money, I don't think, or not only that, but the specific humiliation of having been so certain so fast. Of having moved through that certainty with such confidence that she'd thrown me out before the funeral flowers had even wilted. She tested me, she said, and there was something raw in it that wasn't an excuse, just an arrival at understanding. Yes, I said, and I failed. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. She already knew. The formal notification came 3 days later. Patricia sent a certified letter and followed up with a phone call. I wasn't present for it, but she told me afterward that my sister had listened without interrupting, which Patricia considered unusual and possibly a good sign. My brother-in-law apparently tried to argue about the validity of the trust document for approximately 11 minutes before Patricia explained, in measured and irrefutable terms, exactly how thoroughly everything had been prepared, filed, and witnessed. He stopped arguing. They had 30 days to vacate. A generous timeline, Patricia said, and legally they had no grounds to contest. My mother had been of sound mind and had taken every precaution a person could take. The trust was airtight. She had made sure of it. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I'd stood in that kitchen, with my bag in my hand and nowhere to go, I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. Patricia was already there, parked by the curb with 2 colleagues and a folder she carried the way my mother used to carry important things. Close to the body, both hands. My sister answered the door. She was alone. Her husband had gone to work, I found out later. I've thought about that choice of his a lot, whether it was cowardice or strategy or something else entirely. She looked at me for a long moment before she looked at Patricia. "Is this really necessary?" she said. Not meanly, genuinely. "It is," Patricia said. "We're here to begin the transfer of the property as outlined in the trust document. You should have received our correspondence." My sister stepped back and let us in. We sat in the living room, me, Patricia, her 2 colleagues. On furniture my mother had picked out over 30 years of careful weekend sales and antique shop browsing. The ceramic owl was back on the entryway table. I noticed it the moment I walked in and didn't say anything. My sister sat across from us with her hands in her lap again. Patricia walked through it clearly and without ceremony. The trust, the timeline, the transfer, the 30-day vacate notice. Everything my mother had made sure was airtight. When she finished, my sister was quiet for a while, then she said, "I want you to know I didn't plan to hurt you." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "You didn't plan anything. That was the whole point." She winced. Not the reaction of someone being attacked, but someone who recognized the precision of it. "Mom knew," she said quietly. "Not an accusation. Just a statement." "Yes," I said, "she knew. And this is the part that I've had to sit with since. My mother didn't do what she did because she wanted to humiliate my sister, or punish her, or win some posthumous argument. She did it because she loved us both, and she knew my sister better than my sister knew herself. And she wanted there to be no ambiguity, no room for revision, no version of events that could be argued away later. She wanted the truth to be the documentation, and it was. My sister moved out on a Sunday, which I didn't plan. I didn't choose the timing. Patricia handled the logistics, and I stayed away until it was done. I didn't want to watch. There was nothing triumphant about it, and I'd spent enough years confusing other people's discomfort for my own satisfaction that I knew better now. I came back on a Monday. The house smelled like my mom in a way that hit me harder than I expected. Lavender something. Maybe her lotion, soaked into the curtains. The yellow tile was still chipped in the corner by the sink. The laminated emergency contact sheet was still inside the cabinet door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I hadn't been looking for revenge. I hadn't planned any of this. I'd just shown up at an attorney's office with a piece of paper my mother had left for me because she'd asked me to, and everything else had followed from that. My mother was the most organized person I've ever known. She didn't leave things to chance, and she didn't leave things to hope. She left them to documentation, to foresight, to the quiet, unglamorous work of making sure that the people who showed you who they were would be held accountable by their own actions. She had trusted me to show up. And I had. That's the thing about grief that no one really prepares you for. It's not just that you miss the person. It's that you keep discovering them after they're gone. In the things they set in motion. In the choices they made when you weren't watching. In the letters they wrote. And the attorneys they called. And the careful, deliberate way they tried to protect the people they loved. My mother protected me the only way she could. She told the truth. She wrote it down. She made sure someone else could verify it. And when the house was quiet and the light was coming in through the window over the sink, the way it always did in the late afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table and I just breathed. I wasn't thinking about what I'd won. I was thinking about her. And for the first time since the hospice and the funeral and the cardigan I still hadn't washed, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt very simply like I was home.